It was late afternoon in Galilee, and the sun was gently sinking behind the distant hills. The air was warm and the scent of olive trees filled the breeze. Jesus and his disciples had gathered at the foot of a hill overlooking the sea, a spot they often visited for reflection after long days of ministry. The usual peace and camaraderie were absent this evening. There was a tension in the air, a feeling of uncertainty that none of the disciples could fully express. Jesus had recently begun speaking about his departure, using words and phrases that unsettled them deeply. The future seemed unclear, even frightening. The men who had followed him faithfully for years now found themselves wrestling with doubts and fears they had never encountered before. Peter, who had always been the boldest among them, was the first to speak. His voice, usually confident, was subdued and uncertain. "Lord," he began hesitantly, "you've spoken of things that are coming, things we don't fully understand. We fear what lies ahead. What will happen to us? What will happen to the mission we've built with you if you are no longer here with us?" There was a quiet murmur of agreement from the others. Andrew, usually quiet, nodded in silence. James looked down at his hands, unsure of how to voice his feelings. John, who was sitting closest to Jesus, simply stared at the ground, his heart heavy with the thought of losing the teacher he loved so deeply. For a few moments Jesus did not respond. He looked out over the water, his eyes distant, yet full of thought. The evening light bathed his face in a soft glow, and the disciples waited, knowing that when he spoke, his words would carry more weight than they could yet understand. After a moment, Jesus turned to them with a gentle smile, one that calmed the waves of their fears, even before he began to speak. "My beloved friends," he said softly, "I know the burdens that weigh on your hearts. Change is coming, yes, but it is not to be feared. Change is part of life, and through it, God often brings new growth and deeper understanding. Let me share with you a story of loss but also of hope and renewal." The disciples leaned in. Every word Jesus spoke carried a weight that touched their souls, and they knew this story would hold a lesson they needed to hear. The story of the vineyard owner. Once, in a small village nestled among rolling hills, there was a vineyard owner who was known for his kindness and wisdom. His vineyard was vast, stretching across the hills, and it was the pride of the region. The grapes produced by his vineyard were rich and full, praised by the villagers for their sweetness. The owner had inherited the land from his father, and before that, it had belonged to his father's father. For generations, the vineyard had been the heart of their family, passed down with love and care. The vineyard owner had spent years tending to his vines. Each morning he would rise with the sun, walking through the rows of grapevines, inspecting the leaves, pruning where necessary, and ensuring that each plant received the care it needed. He knew every inch of his land intimately. The sound of the wind rustling through the vines was like music to him, and the sight of the grapes ripening in the sun brought him a deep sense of peace. For many years the vineyard flourished under his care. The harvests were plentiful, the fruit was sweet, and the vineyard became a symbol of abundance and stability. The villagers admired the owner for his dedication, and many of them would visit the vineyard during the harvest, marveling at the beauty of the land and the generosity of the owner, who always shared his bounty. But one year, as summer turned to autumn and the grapes were nearly ready for harvest, a great storm swept through the village. The sky darkened with ominous clouds and the wind began to howl. The storm struck with a fury that the villagers had never seen before. The rain came down in torrents, lashing against the land, while the wind tore through the trees and fields. The vineyard, which had stood for generations, was not spared. The storm uprooted the vines, broke the branches, and scattered the fruit. The ground was flooded, and the once lush, vibrant rows of grapevines were reduced to a broken, tangled mess. The vineyard that had been the pride of the village, a place of beauty and life, was left in ruins. As Jesus spoke, the disciples were transported into the scene. They could almost feel the storm's fury, see the devastation in their minds. The destruction of the vineyard reflected the turmoil they felt inside, the fear of losing the stability they had found in following Jesus. The vineyard owner too was devastated. When the storm had passed, he stood in the midst of his ruined land, his heart heavy with sorrow. 4 days he wandered through the wreckage, unable to comprehend the loss. Every vine he touched was a reminder of the years of care and labor he had poured into the land. What had taken decades to build had been destroyed in a single night. He wept for what had been lost. His soul ached as he looked at the twisted branches, the broken earth, and the scattered fruit that lay rotting on the ground. He felt as though he had lost not only his vineyard but a part of himself. The villagers came to offer their condolences, but the words of comfort did little to ease his pain. They offered to help him rebuild, but the task seemed impossible. How could he begin again after such devastation? How could he restore what had been lost? At this point in the story, the disciples could feel the vineyard owner's grief as if it were their own. Their own fears of losing Jesus, of losing the sense of purpose and direction they had found with him, mirrored the sorrow of the vineyard owner. They understood the depth of his pain because they, too, were grappling with the fear of an uncertain future. Days turned into weeks, and the vineyard owner remained in a state of despair. He no longer rose with the sun to tend to the land, for there was nothing left to tend. The once vibrant vineyard had become a place of mourning, a reminder of all that had been lost. But one morning as he wandered through the ruined rows of vines, something caught his eye. Amidst the broken branches and twisted roots, he noticed a single small green shoot emerging from the soil. It was fragile and small, barely visible among the wreckage, but it was alive. His heart stirred for the first time since the storm. Kneeling down, he gently brushed away the dirt from around the shoot, his hands trembling with both sorrow and hope. He had not expected anything to survive the storm, and yet, here was this tiny vine fighting its way out of the ground. The vineyard owner felt something shift inside him. The storm had taken much, but it had not destroyed everything. This small vine was a sign of life, a sign of resilience. It was fragile, yes, but it was a beginning. With renewed determination, the owner began to care for the tiny vine. He cleared away the debris that surrounded it, watered it, and shielded it from the harsh sun. Slowly the vine grew stronger. Its roots dug deep into the soil and its leaves unfurled toward the sky. It was not long before new shoots began to emerge from the ground, each one a testament to the vineyard's will to live. In time the entire vineyard began to heal. New vines sprouted from the soil, and the broken branches were replaced with fresh, vibrant growth. The vineyard, though changed, was reborn. And when the harvest finally came, the grapes were sweeter than they had ever been before. The vineyard owner, who had once wept for what had been lost, now rejoiced in the abundance that had been restored. He walked through the rows of vines, no longer mourning the past, but celebrating the future. The storm had not been the end, it had been the beginning of something new. The disciples were silent as Jesus finished the story. The weight of his words hung in the air, and they felt the depth of the vineyard owner's journey, the grief, the hopelessness, and finally, the renewal. It was a reflection of their own fears, their own uncertainty about the future, and yet there was hope. Peter, his eyes brimming with tears, spoke first. "Lord," he said softly, "we are like that vineyard owner, aren't we? We fear the storms that are coming. We fear losing you. We don't know how we will continue without you by our side." The other disciples nodded, their own emotions close to the surface. Andrew wiped his eyes, and John, who had been sitting quietly, looked up at Jesus, his heart full of questions he couldn't yet voice. Jesus looked at them with deep love and compassion. "Yes, Peter," he said, "you are like the vineyard owner. There will be storms, and they will come when you least expect them. The things you have come to rely on, the things you love, may be broken. But remember this, the storm does not have the final word. The brokenness is not the end." He stood and walked among them, his voice filled with both tenderness and strength. The vineyard was not destroyed. It was changed, yes, but it was reborn stronger than before. And so it will be with you. You may feel broken, you may feel lost, but from that brokenness new life will come. I am with you always, and the love we share cannot be shaken by any storm. John, his voice barely a whisper, asked, "But Lord, what if we cannot find our way? What if the storm leaves us too broken to rise again?" Jesus knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "My beloved John," he said softly, "you are never alone. Even in your darkest moments when you feel most lost, I will be with you. The vine that rises after the storm is stronger than before because it has deep roots. You too have deep roots, roots in love and faith in the promises of God. And from those roots, new life will grow." Tears filled the eyes of the disciples as they listened. They had feared the changes ahead, the uncertainty of a future without their teacher. But now they understood that change was not something to be feared. It was part of a greater story, a story of renewal, of growth, of a future filled with hope. The wisdom of Jesus, coping with change. Jesus stood, his presence radiating peace and strength. Do not fear the storms of life, my friends. They will come and they may bring sorrow, but they cannot destroy the love that binds us. That love is stronger than any storm, and from it, new life will always rise. The disciples, though their hearts were still heavy with emotion, felt a new sense of peace settle over them. They had been afraid of what was to come, afraid of losing the stability they had found in following Jesus. But now they knew that even in the face of change they would not be alone. They were rooted in something deeper, something unshakable. Jesus smiled at them, the setting sun casting a golden light over the hillside. You will face challenges, but do not fear. The storms may come, but they will pass and you will emerge stronger. Like the vineyard that was reborn after the storm, so too will you be reborn, full of new life, full of hope. The disciples rose slowly, their hearts lighter than before. The fear that had gripped them was still present, but it no longer had the same power over them. They understood now that change was part of the journey, part of the process of growth. And though they could not always see the path ahead, they knew they would walk it together, with Jesus by their side, guiding them even when they could not see him. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, they made their way back to their camp, their steps lighter, their hearts full. They did not know what the future would hold, but they knew that whatever came, they would face it with faith, with love, and with the assurance that new life would always come from the storms. This is end of the story. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.